Good morning, Dan. And in for Amy this morning is John Anthony, former state rep, former police officer, current host of Black and Right, Saturdays, 1 to 3 p.m. on our airwaves here.
Hey, hey.
Hey, John.
That went by fast.
Okay,
Good Lord.
Goes by fast.
Yes.
Got so much work to do, And when you don't really feel like it's work, it just flies by. So it's so enjoyable.
Good point.
That's what people often say about my company. Yeah, exactly. That is a punchline. All right, so here's the thing, or here's the question. I love the comparison that was made by our friend John Tamny. Are we all on North Sentinel Island in America now? Well, before we get to an explanation of that metaphor, one guy who's not going to North Sentinel Island, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
So there was never under discussion any mandates to take vaccines. We will not have COVID vaccines mandated in Florida. The flip side of that, though, with these vaccine passports is it's completely unacceptable for either the government or the private sector to impose upon you the requirement that you show proof of vaccine to just simply be able to participate in normal society. You want to go to a movie theater? Should you have to show that? No. You want to go to a game? No. You want to go to a theme park? No. So we're not supportive of that. I think it's something that people have certain freedoms and individual liberties to make decisions for themselves. I also wonder, it's like, okay, you're going to do this, and then what, give all this information to some big corporation? You want the fox to guard the hen house? I mean, give me a break. I think this is something that has huge privacy implications. It is not necessary to do.
John Tamny is the editor of RealClearMarket's.com, director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks, and the author of the new book, When Politicians Panicked. And I got a signed copy because, John digs me. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We're all on North Sentinel Island now. Explain your piece at AIER, American Institute for Economic Research, which I enjoyed so much.
Well, many listeners remember 2 years ago when John Allen Chau, the Christian missionary, ventured to North Sentinel Island. It's an island off of India, and its people migrated there 50,000 years ago. And it's the most isolated island on Earth. No one knows how many people live there. No one knows the language. And this missionary showed up and was riddled with arrows shot from bows. Now, why did they kill him so quickly? Because if he had gotten close to their people, he would have killed them all. And he would have, because he would have brought flu, chickenpox, all the things that we are immune to in the modern world that they've never been exposed to. And so it's merely a reminder that this notion that you can hide, that you can somehow isolate yourself, and in doing so make yourself better or healthier is laughable. In fact, it robs you of the very exposure necessary to get through life healthfully.
So clearly the message about lockdowns, although, in big cities, the lockdowners, big cities, what happens there is mainly people still just kill each other. So this would be if the tribe there was killing each other, which are clearly not. So it may turn out that the North Sentinelese are more sophisticated than us in the modern world in some respects. But with respect to the lockdowns, I mean, your reaction to the lockdowns that persist, the predictions of doom and gloom with respect to the variants, the slow walking back to schools in New York, in Chicago, elsewhere. And this says just more good news continues to come online with respect to vaccines. Today, Pfizer, 12 to 15-year-olds, 100% effective. And yet the lockdown or the slow walk to normalization persists.
Yeah, it's just tragic. Look, freedom on its own is a virtue. I always stress to people that I would be against lockdowns even if you could prove to me what's not true, that a lack of lockdowns associated with more deaths. I just don't believe in taking away freedom. But the genius of it goes beyond that. Economic growth is easily the biggest enemy of death and disease. Think back to the 19th century when if you were born then, you had as good of a chance of dying as living. that if you broke your hip, you were going to die, that if you got tuberculosis or pneumonia, you were going to die. It was a pretty brutal time to be alive. And what's changed is economic growth. Economic growth produced the resources necessary for doctors and scientists to come up with ways to cure what used to kill us so readily. And so the idea that you take away freedom and use economic desperation as your virus mitigation measure defies basic common sense. And we've been talking about this for a while, you and I and Amy have. It's a tragedy.
Yeah. John, I recall whenever we got some type of virus or illness, my family would all bring us all together so that everybody can get it and get it over with. I called for her immunity the very first time. But I want to talk about, you think back 2019, we have China on the ropes. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I've despised the QAnon type, all those type of things. But you look at what was happening in America, you look at what was happening in the world, the economic, we were just on the rise. And then all of a sudden, the virus hits. And some have said it's come from Wuhan, the lab, and now there's a big back and forth debate on, did it come from a bat or did it come from the lab? I happen to think it came from a lab. I happen to think this was a biological attack on America from China. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, the first thing is I'd say I totally agree with you about families. That's historically what families did, is when someone got an illness, they brought all the kids together to get it out of the way. And so you're right, herd immunity is as old as the hills. It's what people have always done. About China, I would tend to disagree, and let me explain why. For one, if this is the virus they came up with, boy, what are we afraid of? Because it's one that the New York Times has consistently acknowledged is most associated in a death sense with very, very old and sick people in nursing homes. And so kind of a meek virus they came up with. But beyond that, let's never forget that our prosperity is what enables China's. If the U.S. economy implodes, China's economy will implode simply because their wealth is a consequence of them having access to the biggest market in the world, the U.S. And I would add in reverse that we're relying on China's economic growth. Apple sells a fifth of its iPhones in China. GM sells more cars there than it does in North America. It's the second largest market for Nike, for McDonald's. I don't buy that the Chinese would think that they would gain from destroying the country that is the source of their wealth.
I wanted to let's talk about a couple other economic matters, particularly in the area of wand waving. Everybody today is focused on this $2, $3, $4 trillion spending gambit that Biden is going to unveil in Pittsburgh. But something else he's been doing quietly on a small scale, building up to probably something on a larger scale, since this is the disposition of his party, and that is student loan forgiveness. Collectively, Biden at present has canceled $2.3 billion of student loans for about 110,000 student loan borrowers, most recently for some persons with disabilities, and there's no real breakdown on that either. I'd like to see that, but setting that aside for a second, $2.3 billion for 110,000 student loan borrowers, but of course the Bolshevik Bernie crowd, Elizabeth Warren, and others want this to be on a massive scale, like all $1.7 trillion worth of accumulated student debt, not to mention free college or something, free college for certain people going forward. What's your view on this aspect of the wand waving as policymaking?
Well, you don't solve an economic contraction born of big government and central planning with more central planning. Look, all government spending is the politicians arrogating to themselves the right to allocate resources that otherwise would be allocated by the private sector. And so invariably, all it is we're reaching into one set of pockets to put it into another set of pockets. There's no economic growth, but now there's an incentive, I suppose, for people to take on even bigger debt going to college because they have a reasonable supposition that instead of having to pay it off eventually, that the taxpayers will pay it off. And so it's immoral. It has nothing to do with growth, and it speaks to a bigger problem. When governments spend, that's Nancy Pelosi and Bernie and Mitch McConnell and others allocating the economy's resources. Central planning that fails in total also fails in a limited sense. Why would we go that route?
Mm-hmm. And so, you're thinking about what has been proposed and what is being advanced, including on the tax side, increasing corporate rates, increasing individual rates in the upper brackets, increasing capital gains rates, particularly on long-term capital gains. I mean, you're looking potentially at if all that were to come to pass, a major market correction, maybe towards the end of this year, the beginning of 2022. I wonder, again, not to be conspiratorial, if sort of crashing the market and continuing to run the printing press is an economic strategy by the left, so Cloward Piven style almost.
Well, there, I suppose I'm a little bit more optimistic because, as we discuss a lot, markets anticipate. They don't wait for the result. And so the fact that markets have been relatively buoyant for quite some time, I think is a signal to what you allude. Yeah, they're talking a lot about capital gains hikes and corporate tax hikes and everything, but how much of that will they get? It's very much a divided Congress, thank goodness, right now. It's basically down the middle. Senate is basically down the middle. We knew they were going to get this spending plan, the $1.9 trillion. That was going to happen whether it was Biden in office, it was going to happen whether Trump was in office. Do I think it was correct? No, but it was going to happen either way. Beyond that, it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to do any major policy changes simply because they don't have the votes for it. Again, thank goodness for that. Divided government's good.
He is John Tamny, editor of RealClearMarket's.com, director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks, and the new book you want to pick up, When Politicians Panicked, just released this week. John, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And you joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Hi, Amy Jacobson here, and I know I was complaining about the last mortgage